I have been reading the light novel of Overlord because I wanted to see how Madhouse is actually adapting this series. And I will say right now, when it comes to staying true to the plot and all that type of stuff, Madhouse is doing a very good job. But I'm not going to really talk about that right now. I'll save that for a separate video, probably later today, tomorrow, or this week. But I just want to say, to clarify, from what I have read of Overlord, Madhouse is doing a pretty damn good job with this anime adaptation. So now that I've said that, let's talk about this episode, which I really just was shocked with that ending. I didn't expect that. Okay, so, a hamster. As I've read this in the light novel, I was curious on how Hamsuke would look. I was really curious because the way Ainz depicts him is like he's some form of gerbil hamster thing. And I'm like, when I was thinking of this creature, I'm like, there's no way he looks that bad or that funny. And after witnessing him appear in this episode, no wonder Ainz is so embarrassed, and the way he acts towards the end of the episode makes so much sense. Like how he was embarrassed to be riding this type of creature because it looks like a giant-ass hamster. I mean, think about this for a second, okay? If you're strolling on your steed and it's a giant hamster, what is people really going to look at? Like, okay, let's put this in perspective. Let's say you have a guild. You're playing a game, online RPG game, okay? You have your friends. They each have their own mounts. One has a skeleton horse. One has a noble white steed full equipped with battle armor. And then the one on the side is like some form of dragon mount. Okay, that's pretty badass. And then all of a sudden you see your friend Ainz pop up and he's riding a giant-ass hamster. I mean, of course it's funny, but in terms of seriousness, I mean, can you really take that serious? No. So, I like how that was done and how that was handled in this. And actually, it had a more of a comedy-type vibe to it compared to how the light novel showcased it, which I will, go into that in just a second. But let's start off at the beginning of the episode, what it was about. So the first part of the episode continues off where last week's episode left off, with the awkward nature of Ainz and his party because of what they said to Ainz and how most likely he lost his guild members or lost his party. That awkward atmosphere is still there towards the beginning of this episode, which gets cleared up once Ainz asks a question like, oh, can you tell me more about that dragon? So the atmosphere there was kind of like them not really knowing what to say to Ainz because of the situation the night before, because there was a question that was said that hurt Ainz' feelings, and he didn't really even know how to react at all. So that kind of explains the first part of the episode. Moving on to that, you also have it to where we get to the village. Now, this village, if you need more clarification, which I think is very obvious, I mean, anyone can guess, is the village that got attacked multiple episodes back. And we get to see exactly how the village is moving on after what has recently happened in the past couple episodes. As we know, a bunch of people were killed. Ainz went in, Clockwork mopped them up and kicked their fucking ass. It was like no challenge whatsoever. So to see the aftermath of what has happened, how people are trying to move on, along with building a fence, like some form of defense around the village, even though it's not the best defense, and if, let's say, Ainz, someone as strong as Ainz, was to come after this village, they wouldn't stand a chance. At the very least, that fence will hold off regular creatures, maybe regular goblins or regular ogres, depending on how skilled these villagers get, which leads into one of the main things. As we see is there's goblins now guarding the village, and as we see is that this situation right now, these goblins are actually because of what Ainz gave the girl around episode, it was episode 2 or 3. Episode 2 or 3, as we remember, Ainz gave, that horn, the goblin horn, to the girl for she can use, and as he said, once you use these, the horns, or this horn to summon goblins, they won't disappear. Like, there's no timer on these goblins. They'll stay around until they're all dead. And so what that means is these goblins are permanent residents of this village, and they won't disappear unless they die. So that makes them kind of faithful to the girl that summoned them, and also just shows you now they have like demi-humans kind of backing them, where they won't have to really worry about other goblins attacking them. Because I want to take a few moments to actually talk about this. In RPG terms, if you're to play a game, I think anyone that has played enough games like RPGs and stuff could probably tell the difference between these goblins and the goblins we saw in last week's episode. Take a moment to think about this. See, in last week's episode, we saw goblins and ogres that Ainz mopped up like it was nothing. These goblins didn't look like they were very intelligent. They looked like they're children, they're kind of stupid, and they were just killed way too easy. I mean, the ogres were self-explanatory. They were really dumb. So you could see the difference between these goblins and then the goblins that was summoned through the horn. Like, they're more intelligent, they're able to have, you know, speech and talk to humans, and they also seem to know how to hold weapons and carry themselves where they're not just violent and savage for war. So it just goes to show you that they're really not that dumb. These goblins are on a higher tier than the goblins we saw beforehand, which is to be expected if you think about it, because, I mean, Ainz gave an item over, and as we've seen from Ainz, he's very fucking OP, and when he has equipment and he gives it out, it's pretty damn strong. So, of course, these goblins most likely are not the standard level that you would normally see early on when you're becoming an adventurer. Most likely these goblins are very strong that could wipe out maybe a level 15, level 20 top player. Food for thought. Now that I've said that, one thing I want to point out is what Ainz was talking about with how the villagers have improved since what has happened to them, how they're able to fight back and defend themselves, because after the aftermath of what happened, how the villagers got slaughtered, like, you know, children, friends, family, parents, everybody was getting slaughtered, they're now taking up the initiative to where they can defend themselves without worrying about someone else coming to save their ass, and no one might not even come, because there will probably be a time to where they might get attacked again, maybe by goblins to something else, since, you know, the wise king of the forest is now gone, you know, Hamsuke. They might get attacked, so they need to be able to defend themselves, because Ainz is not always going to be there, if you think about it, but Ainz did make a promise that he would protect the village. He would make sure the village is protected, so you could kind of assume that Ainz might send a bodyguard or some sort to guard the village. Maybe he might put Hamsuke to stay there in the village to just guard them. That is a good possibility. Now, moving on to that, moving into the forest segment, or actually no, before I get into the forest segment, let's talk about the deal with the potions. So we come to find out why the boy wanted to travel and why he wanted to go to the forest to get herbs, because he kind of figured out the secret of Ainz, because Ainz, as we know, he got a potion a couple episodes back. It kind of revealed a little bit of a mystery, because this potion was worth a lot of money, and this boy was trying to figure out, okay, so how did Ainz acquire this type of a potion? And so this boy was kind of trying to figure out how to get close to Ainz, where he could figure out how this was done, which in turn leads it to where Ainz gets his identity revealed, and that leads to point A to point B, where he says, I'll protect the village, please don't reveal my secret, and then they go into the forest to collect some herbs. So that's kind of the middle half of the episode. So let's move into the second half, last half of the episode. So, the forest fight. That is something I want to really talk about, because there was a couple things I noticed were rather different from the light novel. Now, hold your horses real quick. Let me explain. Just because what I said that was not in the anime doesn't mean it's bad. Like, what was removed wasn't really necessarily that important, because it can actually be explained, or it's not really needed, so to say, because it makes a lot more sense in anime form for what we have seen from Overlord. So let's explain what was kind of cut. Now, as we saw, Aura appeared in the forest. And this is the only thing I say that's a little bit iffy about, because Aura appeared in the forest out of nowhere, kind of, and we didn't really see any communication of why Aura was there at all. If you think about it, she just appeared, and so it's kind of weird and unsettling, but in the light novel, it was explained that Momonga sent Aura to this forest to set up a base camp, and to try to figure out if any of these creatures might join Nazarick and their fight to increase their fame and popularity. So Aura was there to kind of set up a second base and also recruit monsters. That was the entire point of why Aura was there. And so, that being cut, I'm just curious, like, why that was done. I mean, thinking about it, I don't think it's really that important, so to say, at this time, especially when it comes to anime, because I think this anime is only going to be, like, 12 to 13 episodes, so of course it's not probably going to get to nowhere near what's ever important with that segment, so of course it makes sense, and it can be added later on, but I was just wondering why they would try to remove something like that. But the next thing that makes a lot of sense why it was removed was the fight between Hamsuke and Ainz. Yes, there was a fight between the giant-ass hamster and Ainz. There was supposed to be a fight. Now, just because the fight was skipped doesn't mean this is bad, because the fight was mainly there just to showcase that Ainz is not really that experienced as a warrior. He just frills his weapons around. It's like, oh, I just frill my weapons around. He's not really a warrior. He's like, just using a weapon, but he doesn't really know how to use sword skills, if you get my point. So the fight between Hamsuke was kind of showcased that Ainz is not really that much of a warrior. But this kind of scene kind of gets reenacted later on down the road, so it kind of be repetitive if it was done a second time in the anime, since Madhouse is kind of short on time, since they are making this like a 12 to 13 episode series. So of course they might skip out on this, which makes a lot more sense why Ainz just decided to finish the fight really fast, because he's like, I don't have no time for this. He just used despair, and then Hamsuke just fell on his back, which that did happen in the light novel, just they cut out the fight. So it makes more sense how it ended like that, because if you think about it, for Hamsuke to just get defeated like this legendary monster that is showcased to be fucking strong, to get defeated that easy just still once again shows you how overpowered Ainz is. And I feel like Madhouse doesn't really want you to actually lose that thought about the series, like how Ainz is an overpowered being, how he really has no worthy opponents. I think that's where Madhouse is trying to go, how they're trying to make us feel like Ainz really doesn't have a challenge. I think that's where Madhouse is leading towards when it comes to the showcasing of the anime series, which is not a bad thing, because if they get to a certain area in the series, like Volume 3 for instance, that is going to be fucking amazing if they continue this type of atmosphere throughout the series. Speaking of which, I want to talk about something. So, I'm not going to spoil nothing, but I watched the opening again, and I noticed quite a few things from the opening song that were actually happening in Volume 3 of the light novel. And judging by the pacing of Overlord, we'll probably finish Volume 2 of Overlord, probably by the end of the series. So, I'm curious, why am I seeing Volume 3 type aspects in the opening song? I'm very curious about that. Is Madhouse implying that they might make a Season 2, or this might become like a 24 episode series? Like, let me explain. Sometimes anime companies tend to say like they're going to make a 12 episode series, but then when it gets to like the 11th to 12th episode, they announce that it's going to be 24 episodes, because they were just seeing how the popularity of the said series was, if they were worthy enough to even continue making episodes. And so it makes me feel the reason why the opening showcases some of the events from Volume 3 is that there might be a possibility they could venture into Volume 3 type stuff that will happen in the series, which makes me quite hyped, because, I mean, as we know, Madhouse doesn't really like changing their openings. I mean, when it comes to the series they usually don't make a second opening. They don't, even if it's a 24 episode series. I mean, Ore Monogatari explains itself. Look at Hunter x Hunter. And so they don't really change their openings majority of the time, and showcasing elements from Volume 3, which I don't think it's really that possible for them to showcase Volume 3 with the remaining episodes we have. So my judgment from what I am assuming is that Madhouse might announce a continuation, because there is 9 volumes at the moment when it comes to Overlord out at the moment, and we're only in Volume 2. And they're doing really good pacing. So I don't know, that's a question I have. So yeah, my thoughts of Overlord this week, fucking amazing, very good series, I enjoy it, and I mean, hey, a light novel's fucking amazing. If you want an extra good read of Overlord, I recommend reading that light novel. It's a different experience in of itself. So tell me your thoughts, comments below, please be safe, Chibi out.